So next up, we have Chris Wallace grills Congressman Scalise. That's right. Chris Wallace grills Congressman Scalise. And how does he do that? Well, of course, they talk about the Hunter Biden investigation. And of course, all Congressman Scalise, who's a Republican congressman from Louisiana, all he wanted to do is come on Chris Wallace and talk about where we are with the stimulus and where we are with getting people checks and getting businesses assistance so as to make our economy not run completely into the ground. That's really the issue, right? That is the most important issue, this particular point in time in American history, is getting our economy moving again. So Chris Wallace, he talks about Hunter Biden and a bunch of other things too. Naturally, he talks about voter fraud. We have the first of two clips, and here it is.
But for now, I think if you just discount the fact that millions of people wonder why is it that in some states, Florida, Texas, large states, they had the results by 10 o'clock that night. And then in other states, it was days and weeks. And during those days and weeks, you saw massive vote swings that just seed a lot of distrust. That's got to get resolved. We've got to start getting back to the point where we can resolve our elections on the night.
Congressman Scalise.
Yeah.
The reason that there were these vote swings was because in a lot of states they weren't able to count the millions of mail-in ballots until election night. And everybody knew that, and in fact it happened. In Florida, it went the other way. They were able to count the mail-in ballots early, so it favored Biden early, and then it swung to Trump. In Pennsylvania, they had to count the mail-in ballots late, so it started pro-Trump, and then it swung to Biden.
So if you, according to Chris Wallace, he's saying that you really had swings in voting because of the fact that mail-in ballots in some states were still coming in, which is true, by the way, and mail-in ballots were coming in some states even days after the election. And at the same time, some states, on the other hand, counted ballots that were absentee ballots as they arrived, just prior to the election as well as the day of the election. So states handled the absentee ballot matter differently. Well, yeah, we know that. We know that. Scalise's point, and I'm not really necessarily sure he articulated it as well as he could have, because that's in part because Chris Wallace is such a tool when he asks questions. But here's the thing. If you know what the score is in a game, if you know the day of the election that your opponent is winning by 100,000 votes, and there are still mail-in ballots that can be put in the mail and arrive 3 days later. And I'm being careful, ladies and gentlemen, because I don't want to be deplatformed from YouTube. That's the God's honest truth. What is it that you could do? Well, let's use an analogy. Okay, so let's say you're watching a football game, and you are the one guy that knows that you could, you could actually add players to the game, and you could do that at the last possible minute, and you could violate all the rules. There's one example, but I have a better example. This is actually my son's example because he is a huge soccer fan. So Sam, if you're listening, this is on you. And that is, let's just say you have a soccer game, right? Soccer games, you only have a halftime, and the halftime's very short, and you have offsides in soccer. So the first half of soccer, both teams play by the offsides rule. The second half of soccer, only one team plays by the offsides rule. Is that really fair? Is that really fair? Of course it's not fair. And you can continue doing all kinds of things when you have the offsides rule applied to your opponent but not to you. And if you choose to not play by that rule, then, certain things can happen. So you might ask me, podcast listeners, Mark, why you not talking about the issue directly and so forth? Well, because on iTunes and on Spotify, where we send this podcast, among other places, and Rumble, we can say whatever we want to say. But on YouTube, they will deplatform you, so we have to talk about stories, unfortunately. So here's Chris Wallace saying, voter fraud, come on. And he's also talking to Congressman Scalise. We have that clip, and here it is.
The Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr, appointed by Donald Trump, said he had his federal investigators go out. There was no vote fraud.
Well, Chris, first of all, you look at New York, right? The Claudia Tenney race in New York, she's up by 12 votes. Just the other day, they found 55 votes in a desk drawer. You know, this kind of stuff, people look at this and go, what is going on? This is the United States of America. It's not Venezuela. That's what gets people irate. You know, why is this still going on? Let's have a chain of custody. Let's get back to making sure that everybody can have full confidence in our elections, but just to look the other way.
So to be fair, Chris Wallace did have, I think, Claudia Tenney on his show, I believe, last week. But the fact of the matter is that Claudia Tenney, who is running for Congress in New York, her race still hasn't been called because the massive mail-in balloting that occurred, somehow they miraculously in New York State keep finding ballots. It's like, oh, and that's true, by the way. They found a bunch of ballots in a drawer. I mean, come on, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we have an election day. There's a beginning and there's a definitive end, and the election is over. Did you miss it? Did you not cast your ballot? Too bad. That's why we have a definitive day. But not for some reason in states where Democrat governors run those states. The election continues until you get the outcome that you want. And that is the case with Claudia Tenney. And you gotta wonder why Chris Wallace really isn't interested in actually talking about this particular issue in more detail. In fact, even when he talked to Claudia Tenney, he really didn't even ask her the question like, you know, hey, how many ballots have been found since the day of the election that you weren't aware of? I mean, here's a better question. How many ballots were actually mailed out in that district? How many were mailed out? And how many were returned as of the day of the election? Apparently, election boards didn't know the answer to that question. And to be fair, maybe they didn't have sufficient resources to be able to run these kinds of elections because they usually run in-person elections, right? Maybe that's possible. So why did Governor Cuomo allow it to happen then? And we know why, because we have Claudia Tenney, who's, in my opinion, a clear winner of the congressional race, yet New York State won't call her election because they keep finding mysteriously ballots. The only problem is that the ballots they keep finding, for whatever reason, they haven't really gone in Claudia Tenney's opponent's favor, which means that it's only a matter of time before a new batch shows up, right? A new batch, except that batch will be like, 100 to 1. So for Claudia's opponent. And that is Chris Wallace grills Congressman Scalise.